Pokémon games are among the most beloved and played of all time. Behind their colorful facade, however, lie disturbing secrets and mysteries that have never been fully explained. From glitches that seem to defy the laws of programming to urban legends that have frightened generations of players. The early titles in the series in particular are shrouded in an aura of unsolved puzzles. What's really behind the haunting music of Lavender Town? Are there forgotten Pokémon in the game files? And what is the truth about MissingNo? Here are the mysteries of the Pokémon games. First generation. If there's one place in the early Pokémon games that has left an indelible mark on players' memories, it's undoubtedly Lavender Town. Unlike the other Kanto towns, bustling and vibrant, Lavender Town is a spooky place, enshrouded in a melancholic atmosphere. What really makes this town so unsettling? Beyond the Pokémon Tower, the cemetery where deceased Pokémon rest, the real element that fuels the mystery is the town's music. This melody, composed with high, dissonant tones, has given rise to one of the darkest legends in the series, the Lavender Town Syndrome. I talked about this creepypasta legend in more detail in another video. Go check it out. According to this legend, the original music of the first two Pokémon games, Red and Green, in the Japanese versions, contained frequencies capable of causing discomfort, anxiety, and even hallucinations in young children who listened to the melody. Some versions of the legend even claim that the number of suicides among young people increased after the game's release in 1996, prompting Game Freak to modify the track in subsequent versions. Obviously, there's no concrete evidence to support this theory, but that didn't stop the story from spreading, becoming one of the most famous creepypastas of all time. The second mystery concerns the ghost of Marowak, a Pokémon whose history is directly tied to Team Rocket's cruelty. During the game, the player arrives in Lavender Town and discovers that the Pokémon Tower is haunted by restless spirits. There, the player discovers that Team Rocket is trying to steal a Cubone so they can sell their bones as valuable items. During their mission, however, the Team Rocket members stumbled upon a Mother Marowak who desperately tried to protect her baby. Unfortunately, she was brutally killed by the group of criminals, and her soul, unable to find peace, remained trapped in the tower, manifesting as a ghost Pokémon that haunts anyone who tries to advance to the upper floors. Only thanks to the Sylph Scope, we can identify her as Marowak, the Cubone's mother, in one of the most emotional scenes of the first generation. After finding peace, her cub Cubone is adopted by Mr. Fuji, a kind man who tries to protect abandoned or troubled Pokémon. The story of Marowak is one of the few stories in the Pokémon series where a Pokémon's explicit death is confirmed, a theme rarely addressed so directly in the games. The fact that Team Rocket caused the death elevates the title to a more mature level for its intended audience. The third mystery we'll discuss is the missing number. Without a doubt, the most famous and anomalous glitch of the first generation. Missing number is short for missing number. It's a glitch Pokémon that appeared in the first Pokémon games due to a programming error. Normally, the game is programmed to assign an ID, or identification number, to each Pokémon in the Pokédex. However, there are some empty boxes for content that was never implemented, or was removed during development. When the game attempts to load a Pokémon into these missing boxes, it finds no valid data, and thus generates a missing number. There are various methods for encountering the glitch Pokémon, but the most famous is through the Old Man glitch on Cinnamon Island. To activate the glitch, you must proceed in this order. Talk to the Old Man in Viridian City, who will show you how to catch a Pokémon. You must then immediately fly to Fuchsia City and sail along the east coast of Cinnamon Island. By doing this, you are almost guaranteed to encounter Missing Number, or another glitch Pokémon. This happens because, after the Old Man's demonstration, the game temporarily stores the player's name in an area of the code intended to generate wild Pokémon. Sailing along the coast of Cinnamon Island, the game attempts to fish for data from an area not intended to contain Pokémon information. The result is Missing Number. Capturing, or even simply encountering MissingNo can have unpredictable effects on the game, such as graphical distortions, sudden crashes, or duplication of items. I mentioned that it's also possible to encounter some variants of MissingNo. These look like ghosts, or fossils of Aerodactyls or Kabutops, and their presence has fueled the theory that they could be Pokémon cut from development. Unlike other bugs, Game Freak never tried to hide the MissingNo glitch. In fact, in an official Nintendo FAQ, it was described as a defective Pokémon that shouldn't be caught, but without further explanation. Since I mentioned possible Pokémon cut from development earlier, let's talk about the last and most interesting mystery of the first generation. There are some Pokémon that were created, tested, and then removed from the game before its official release. However, some traces of these deleted Pokémon remained within the game's code. This, of course, fueled speculation and theories among fans. Analysis of the game files revealed several beta Pokémon that were never officially released. Some of these had incomplete designs. while others appeared to be alternative versions of Pokémon we know today. One of the most famous cases of the first-generation games is that of Gorochu, an evolution of Raichu with horns and a more ferocious appearance. This Pokémon was confirmed by the developers themselves, who stated that they had removed it because the game was unbalanced with a second evolution for Pikachu. Among the data for Pokémon Red and Pokémon Blue, an identification code for an unreleased Pokémon, codenamed Omega, was found. Its appearance is unknown, but some fans believe it could have been a Proto-Lugia, or a discarded legendary Pokémon. Another discovery concerns Blastoise, which existed in a very early stage of development as a Pokémon separate from the Squirtle evolutionary line. This means that Blastoise was initially not related to Squirtle and Wartortle, but was considered a Pokémon in its own right. Only later did the developers decide to merge it with the Squirtle evolutionary line by modifying its design. The most mysterious Pokémon found in the prototypes is a prehistoric-looking, massive monster simply called Kaiju in the files, a Japanese term meaning giant monster, and may have been an early concept for Tyranitar in my opinion, later introduced in the second generation. Another interesting discovery was that of Anemon, a Pokémon that some fans believe may have been an early idea for Ditto. The game code contains an identifier that suggests the existence of a Pokémon capable of transforming into other Pokémon. This may have been an early test for Ditto, which was later reworked into its current form. There are several reasons why these Pokémon never saw the light of day. Memory limitations are certainly one of them. We're still talking about games for the very first Game Boy, and the balancing act could be also another good reason for that. Some Pokémon may have been too strong or too weak, so the developers decided to leave them out. One last reason that comes to mind is the fact that some Pokémon didn't have final designs, and so, perhaps due to a lack of originality or lack of time, they were discarded. Second generation. The second generation of Pokémon games, with Johto as its setting, has perhaps left behind the most unsolved mysteries and unanswered questions. Who are the unknowns? And what dark power lurks in the ruins of Alph? What tragedy struck the burned tower? And what is the true origin of the legendary beasts? And finally, which Pokémon were deleted, leaving behind a game that could have been different? Let's begin with the mystery of the unknowns. Anyone who has explored the Johto region in Pokémon Gold, Silver, Crystal, or the remakes Earth Gold and Soul Silver will have stumbled upon the mysterious ruins of Alph, located southwest of Violet City. These ancient ruins are shrouded in mystery and legend. They are an archaeological area full of puzzles, where the unknowns and various enigmatic artifacts are found. The unknowns, as you all know, are Pokémon shaped like the letters of the Latin alphabet. There are 28 different shapes. 26 represent the letters of the alphabet, while the last two, introduced in Generation 3, resemble a question mark and an exclamation point. Inside these ruins are rooms with puzzles depicting ancient Pokémon, and once a puzzle is completed, the player unlocks a new type of unknown Pokémon that will begin appearing in the area. Inside each room of the ruins are inscriptions in the unknown alphabet, which, when translated, reveal instructions to follow. In the first room, the puzzle to complete is a Kabuto, and the graffiti reads, "Escape." So if you use an escape rope in front of the graffiti, a hole will form that will allow access to a hidden room. There, you'll find common items such as berries, as well as a written message, also in the unknown alphabet, that reads, "Our words shall remain here for the ages." In the second room, the puzzle is an Aerodactyl, and the graffiti says, "Light." To access the secret room, you'll need to flash the carvings. Inside that, you'll find items like Heal Powder, Moonstone, Energy Root, and so on. The message written here is, "Thus we shall erect a Pokémon statue outside." As we progress into the third room, the puzzle we'll find depicts an Ammonite, and the carving on the wall depicts water. The secret room is accessible through the middle cave, and you'll also need a water stone in your backpack to do that. The room will contain other objects and tools we can collect and use, while the inscription reads, "They possess great insight and refuse the outside world." The final room contains a puzzle depicting Ho-Oh, and the graffiti reads, "Phoenix." To access this final room, you'll need Ho-Oh in your party, and among the various tools you can take from within the room, you'll find the final cryptic message. "We humans must learn to walk in harmony with them. We depart for their sakes." The true history of the unknowns has not yet been fully explained. Some fans believe they are extra-dimensional creatures, perhaps connected to cosmic entities like Arceus. In fact, in the second-generation remakes, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, by taking Arceus to the ruins of Alph, we will have the opportunity to reach an unknown area of the archaeological site, the so-called Sinjo ruins. Cynthia, the champion of the Sinnoh League, will accompany us in exploring this area. Once inside the ruins, Arceus will demonstrate its ability as a creator by giving birth to 3 Pokémon, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. Observing the scene of the creation event, we can see that during the ritual, many unknowns appear. For this reason, some believe that the unknowns are fragments of Arceus's power, or that they were the first beings to appear in the Pokémon universe, even before the deity of time and space. Now, let's talk about the Burned Tower. The Burned Tower, also known as the Brass Tower, was an important Pokémon sanctuary along with the Bell Tower. However, a mysterious fire destroyed it 150 years before the events of Pokémon Gold and Silver. The tower's myth says that the legendary Pokémon Ho-Oh once lived inside the tower, but the fire forced it to flee. During the fire, which lasted for days, 3 unidentified Pokémon died. Ho-Oh, grieving for the tragedy, revived the 3, transforming them into Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. These 3 legendary beasts, if you think about it, represent the forces that destroyed the tower. Raikou is the lightning that started the fire, Entei is the fire that burned everything, and Suicune is the water that extinguished the flames. The real question, however, is what were the Pokémon that initially died? Some fans theorize that they were Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon, due to their similarities to the 3 beasts, especially in color. Others, however, believe that they were simply common Pokémon that Ho-Oh elevated to divine beings. An interesting detail that reinforces the theory that the Pokémon killed in the Burned Tower were evolutions is the presence of the Kimono Girls in Ecruteak City. These girls are a group of elegant and mysterious trainers who meet in the theater. Each of them possesses a different Eevee evolution, and their connection to Johto's traditional culture makes them symbolic figures. This coincidence between the evolutions possessed by the Kimono Girls and the possible origin of the legendary beasts is too perfect to be a coincidence. Furthermore, in the second generation remakes, these Kimono Girls play a more prominent role and help the protagonist reach Lugia or Ho-Oh. Let's go back to the tower. Who started the fire? This fact is obviously not stated in the game, but some believe the fire was caused by jealous humans fearing Ho-Oh's power. Another, darker theory suggests the 3 Pokémon were victims of human experiments by Team Rocket. Which theory do you think is more plausible? Let me know in the comments. Now let's talk about the proto-Pokémon of this generation. Based on beta data, one of the most interesting beta Pokémon is Honoguma, a small fire-type bear. Its design is very reminiscent of Teddiursa, but with a livelier appearance and flames on its back. It's thought that it may have been an initial alternative to Cyndaquil, a starter Pokémon of this generation, but its removal from the final game suggests that Game Freak was considering more options in this regard. Another beta Pokémon with a similar fate is Kurusu, which appeared in some promotional images from 1997. Its design resembles a small blue whale, and it too was a possible choice as this generation's starters. Among the discarded Pokémon is also Tsubomido, a possible alternate evolution of Weepinbell, which in my opinion is pretty ridiculous. Look at it! It looks like it's showing you its butt! Okay, jokes apart. The last and the most mysterious beta Pokémon from this generation is Wolfman, a small, all-black being who appears to be wearing Yeti fur. It's an ice type, though you wouldn't know it from its appearance. Finally, did you know about any of these mysteries? Which of the beta Pokémon would you have liked to play with? The third generation of Pokémon with its Hoenn region introduced some of the most intriguing mysteries in the series, such as the mystery of Mirage Island, the mystery of the abandoned ship on Route 108, the Deoxys event, and the Old Man's Back Door. Of course, these chapters also feature some Pokémon betas to talk about, which were leaked in November 2024 via a Terra leak. Now, let's get started. Mirage Island. So, let's begin with the first mystery, Mirage Island. This island is located on Route 130 in the Hoenn region and is one of the most enigmatic places in the region. It is present only in Pokémon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, and should not be confused with the Mirage Islands found in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. As the name suggests, the island is not always visible and visitable, but appears randomly only under certain specific conditions. To access the island, several conditions must be met, making Mirage Island one of the most difficult places to visit in the entire Pokémon video game series. So basically, every day the game generates a random number between 0 and 65,535. Specifically, this number is generated as soon as you press a button in the main menu, and remains valid until you access the main menu again after midnight. The island appears only if this number matches the first 2 bytes of the personality value of one of the Pokémon in the player's party. This means that if you have a Pokémon that meets this requirement, you will be able to make the island appear. An old man, located in a house in Pacific Log Town, can tell the player whether the island is visible or not, thus eliminating the need to physically go to Route 130 every time to check whether the 2 bytes match. However, there are also some workarounds that can simplify the situation. One of it is that if the player's save reaches the maximum recordable game time, which is 990 hours and 59 minutes, the new numbers generated are no longer random, but always equal to 0. The other is, if the cartridge's internal battery is dead and the game clock stops working, new numbers are no longer generated. The last value generated remains valid. Once the island appears, it will be possible to visit it. The only Pokémon encountered on the island is Wynaut, a psychic-type Pokémon, the baby form of a Wobbuffet, so to speak. Furthermore, the island is the only place where lychee berries can be found, an extremely rare item in the game. Mirage Island has obviously been a huge hit within the community. A lot of theories have been put forward about this island, but today I'm going to cover the one I think fit best the entire Pokémon world. Centuries ago, the island was inhabited by many different species of Pokémon who coexisted peacefully. At the apex of the ecosystem were Wobbuffet and Wynaut, charged with duty to protect a tree that grew in the innermost part of the island. The tree produced lychee berries, a rare and powerful fruit capable of granting strength and energy in difficult situations. Okay, that was a joke. Actually, it's not that powerful in my opinion, but it is for sure a rare one in Generation 3. Back to the story. As time went by, the Wobbuffet wouldn't allow other Pokémon get near the berries, chasing them away with increasingly violent methods. The Wobbuffet even went so far as to worship the tree as if it were a true god. However, this fact soon reached the ears of Arceus, the deity of Pokémon, who sent his servant Dialga, the Master of Time, to punish them. As it arrived on the island, Dialga began a terrible battle against the group of Wobbuffet, who were guarding the tree they considered divine. I'm not sure that we can call it a terrible battle. Perhaps annihilation by Dialga is more realistic, don't you think? Anyway, the battle ended with Dialga's victory, of course. It then used its powers to trap the island in a space-time plague, condemning it to never appear in the same timeline for more than a day. Furthermore, within the island, time is frozen. The berry tree is left with only one fruit, and all the Wobbuffet have devolved into Wynauts. The Abandoned Ship. A forgotten shipwreck lies on Route 108 between Slateport City and Dewford Town in the waters of Hoenn. The abandoned ship can only be reached by surfing and can only be fully explored using the dive move. Speaking to a man in the Oceanographic Museum, built by Captain Remo in Slateport City, he will state that the ship's name is the SS Cactus, and that it was once used to transport cargo and passengers. But the real question many players have about this location is, what really happened to this ship? According to the game's lore, the ship was a large luxury vessel that never reached its destination. However, the reason it was abandoned is never explained. When exploring the ship's interior, scattered items and navigational instruments can be found, suggesting that the vessel was suddenly abandoned. Furthermore, some doors are locked and can only be opened with specific keys, creating a sense of mystery and adventure. One of the most popular theories about the story of how this ship was abandoned is that it was struck by a terrible storm generated by Kyogre, the Pokémon that rules the oceans. In the Pokémon Omega Ruby and Pokémon Alpha Sapphire remakes, the entire area of the old ship has been replaced with Sea Mauville, a derelict research facility located in the same location as the ship in the original games. Looking at Wikipedia, and even reading the history of Sea Mauville, we're not told anything about the old ship. Sea Mauville is a facility dedicated to extracting energy resources from the seabed, which was shut down due to the failure of the entire project. Looking for more references in the anime or manga, we can see that in the anime, specifically the episode The Wreck, tells the story of Tommy, a boy who lives on the old ship where he is looking for his Marshtomp after losing his Pokémon there years ago. When Tommy was a child, he trained his Mudkip to evolve into a Marshtomp, and the two later boarded the ship. However, a storm wrecked the ship, and the two were separated during the rescue. Years later, Tommy returns to the abandoned ship to search for his Pokémon partner with the help of Ash and his friends. In the manga, Ruby and Sapphire find the ship traveling on the back of a whale lord. Upon arriving on the ship, they encounter Team Magma, who are on the ship to find a rare scanner. Ruby and Sapphire battle the two members of Team Magma and manage to escape the ship, while the scoundrels take possession of the scanner. The old ship reappears again in the manga, depicting the moment when Kyogre, awakened by the leader of Team Magma, destroys the ship. With these references from the manga and anime, we can therefore imagine that the true story of the old ship was its sudden abandonment due to a storm generated by the legendary Pokémon. Like many of the mysteries we've seen, none of this has ever been confirmed, but only hypothesized by connecting all the various pieces of the puzzle by the entire community. The Deoxys event. Many trainers don't know that by participating in a secret gift event, it was possible to obtain the Aurora ticket, which, if presented at any of the ports in the game, allowed the player to be transferred to Birth Island. This island is located near the 6 and 7 islands within the 7 islands. Once arrived on the island, a small triangular rock would appear in front of the player, located in the center of the island, and, after the player interacted with the mysterious triangle, it would move around the island, and each time the player would interact with it, following the shortest possible route. Once the puzzle of the triangular rock was solved, the color of the rock would change to red, and interacting with it again would trigger an encounter with the mythical Pokémon Deoxys at level 30 in its normal form. When caught, it would then change into its speed form. This is a small event that many players haven't had the chance to experience, or simply weren't fully aware of. The Old Man's Back Door. In Moss Deep City, going to the southern part of the city, we might find an old man's house. As soon as we enter, we'll find the old man sitting there, with whom we can interact and hear his backstory. So far, nothing interesting. The interesting part of this place is the back of the house, where we'll find a door. By interacting with it, we'll open a dialogue box that reads, "The door appears to be locked." This mysterious, inaccessible door sparked countless comments on various Pokémon forums at the time. Everyone asked if there was a way to open the door, and naturally, other users began commenting with the most bizarre methods, such as beating the Pokémon League 100 times. I guess we can consider this fake news a classic in the Pokémon world. These fake myths spread online until some users claimed that the only way to open the door was by using special cards that could be scanned with e-readers when purchasing Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire. But there was a problem. These e-reader cards were only released in North America and Japan. For those unfamiliar with the e-reader, it's a Game Boy Advance peripheral used, as we've already mentioned, to scan cards that unlock events and features in existing games. Returning to our story, there were only 2 of these special cards, and they contained a character and 3 Pokémon. The third Pokémon wasn't revealed, and in its place was a question mark. The 2 characters were either the Gentleman Nils, with a Pokémon team consisting of a Sableye, a Plusle, and the unknown Pokémon, or Lady Astrid, who owns Pokémon like Mawile, Minun, and the unknown Pokémon. To unlock the door, you had to scan the card with the reader. Upon entering the house, the old man would stand before the door, inviting you in. Interacting with him, he'll ask you if you want to start a battle with one of the 2 aforementioned characters. If we accept, we'll enter the room where we'll find the trainer we'll have to face. Unfortunately, this event wasn't available in Europe, since e-readers never caught on. The event feature is still available in the game data. Quick pause to remind you to subscribe to the channel and watch the first episode of this series. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps us. Thank you so much if you do it. Beta Pokémon. The Terra leak that occurred in November 2024 made numerous discarded ideas, such as sprites or lore from older generations of Pokémon, public. Among these discarded beta Pokémon are some that could have made their debut in the 3rd generation games. One of the first leaked Pokémon that immediately catches the eye is this discarded sprite for a Pokémon that was initially conceived as a fossil Pokémon. Its resemblance to Grovyle, the intermediate evolutionary stage of Trico, is striking. It's believed that the idea was later discarded due to the lack of a clear place in the Pokédex, leaving it a Pokémon without a distinct evolutionary line. But, as often happens in the process of creating and developing a Pokémon, the sprite was later reused, reworked, and inserted into the evolutionary line of the 3rd generation Grass-type starter Pokémon. Looking at this Pokémon's design, I think you've probably come across a similar version at least once while browsing Pokémon community forums. Fans dubbed it Latios, Latikin, or Latiazakin, a play on the names of the 2 Pokémon whose sprites it merged with, Blaziken and Latios or Latias. Along with the Pokémon's design, the Pokédex entry was also leaked, describing it as a sort of sun god reborn from flames, linking the Pokémon to a kind of phoenix. Damn, another phoenix. Games freaks sure love the phoenix myth. Although its resemblance to Blaziken is clear, this Pokémon was also far from the final version we know it as. In fact, at the time of its creation, only Torchic existed. So we have confirmation of its initial creation being distinct from the version we know it as today. As we also saw in the previous video, Game Freak also had a different initial idea for the starter Pokémon of the 3rd generation games. Looking at this photo, in addition to Torchic's initial design, which was later modified during the game's development to the final design we know today, what immediately catches the eye is the absence of Mudkip, but rather a water Pokémon named Warabit. I guess they did it right and discarded it. I mean, look at it. It's just a bunny with a life ring. There's nothing special in that. Oh, fun fact, the developers reused the LifeSpring sprite for some NPC or Pokémon trainers. Among the most interesting ideas discarded in the final version of the games is Evolato. The Pokémon's description was that it could evolve randomly into any existing Pokémon. Its sprite, very basic and without any references whatsoever, was designed specifically to give the impression of a Pokémon that could evolve into any other Pokémon. Even its name, Evolato, is a play on words in English meaning Evo Lottery, explicitly specifying the purpose of this Pokémon's creation. Looking closely at this latest design, we can see a certain resemblance to the Pokémon Lapras. In fact, this Pokémon was conceived as a sort of alternative Lapras with flying and ice types. But some fans insist that it may be a prototype sketch of Lugia, or one of its first design ideas. One of the Pokémon to receive the most sprite changes in Generation 3 was undoubtedly Shiftry and its evolutionary line. Initially, its primary form, the baby form to be precise, was supposed to be a red acorn with a dark gray helmet on its head. Its name was Komaru instead of Seedot. An intermediate form was also planned, but no sprites were produced. As for the final form, which later became Shiftry, it was much more similar to a Tengu, a creature from Japanese folklore. However, the developers found it too scary, so they decided to change the design. The new design was almost identical, with the only notable difference being the shape of its nose. Shiftry also underwent several changes during development. Unlike the Pokémon we know today, its body was initially completely green with distinct arms and hands and a sort of wooden mask for a face. This version is very nice, but in this coloration it looks like a goblin, so it might also be too scary, so might have the same policy problem. In the end, Shifty's arms and hands were replaced by the leaf fans the Pokémon has today, while the mask was completely removed. Oh, and the skin color changed as well, of course. Another Pokémon that underwent changes during development in Generation 3 is Hariyama and its entire evolutionary line. Initially, a pre-evolution was planned, a white and blue baby Pokémon with a yellow collar around its neck. This Pokémon was supposed to evolve into a Pokémon called Tapoon, the equivalent of Makuhita, maintaining similar colors to the pre-evolution, highlighting the blue Mawashi, the loincloth of sumo wrestlers. Finally, the final stage would have had a yellow belt around its waist to make the design more realistic and similar to a real sumo wrestler. These details were later removed, and the design became closer to that of the Pokémon we know today. Moving forward, another beta evolutionary line that presents some interesting curiosities is Manectric. Looking at it, Electric had duller colors, red eyes, and a different pose. Manectric, on the other hand, had darker colors, and unlike the final design, its entire legs and chin were yellow. The most interesting thing is that a third evolutionary stage called Ryu was initially planned, a lion with dark brown hind legs and a muzzle, while the rest of its body was aqua green. Of course, the design was unusual, especially because the front legs and head formed a sort of star. I don't know if I'd see it alongside the other two Pokémon these days. I personally find it very ugly. Let me know what your opinion is about it in the comments. Continuing to look at the various beta sprites, there's a curious discovery regarding Flygon's evolutionary line. Initially, the first stage didn't feature Trapinch, which was present in the Pokémon database, but a Pokémon called Yakoko, whose coloring and sprite strongly resembled Vibrava, making it a perfect pre-evolution. Vibrava, on the other hand, didn't have many differences from today, except for a slight shading and closed wings. Flygon, for its part, was much more similar to its official version, but with a completely gray rear section, a plumper body, and wings and eyes similar to its pre-evolutions. However, its design was later modified to become the one we know today. As the last beta Pokémon we're going to talk about today, we have to mention a beta Pokémon that was never officially released. I am referring to Monorobi. Its name emerged thanks to internal leaks from Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, and it appears it was conceived as a small, dog-like fire-type Pokémon, but I think it looks more like a rabbit. The design we received is very rough, almost deformed, a sign that it was probably just a preliminary sketch, never refined. Unfortunately, beyond the name and this rough sprite, we have no other official information, no confirmed evolution, and no data on its stats or abilities. What is certain, however, is that Monorobi has become a bit of a cult classic among Pokémon beta fans, precisely because it offers a rare glimpse behind the scenes of Game Freak's creative process. 4th Generation Old Chateau. The Old Chateau is an abandoned manor located in the Eternal Forest near Eterna City. To reach it, you need the cut move, as there's a small tree blocking the way. This place is famous for its disturbing reputation as a haunted place, so much so that it inspires fear among the residents of Eterna City. Even Gardenia, the city's gym leader, can't hide her unease. Despite her curiosity, when she approaches the mansion, she's often overcome by a sense of dread, fueled by the legends surrounding it. As we enter, the place immediately conveys a sense of abandonment and decay. The first room we encounter is a large foyer, characterized by 2 flights of stairs leading to the upper floor. Near the stairs stands a strange statue, shrouded in an eerie aura, its gaze fixed on an unspecified point, as if guarding a secret hidden within the manor's walls. Next to the statue is the entrance to the dining room, dominated by a long wooden table that seems to have seen better days, while on the left side of the room is the kitchen. On the first floor, we find a large bookcase in the leftmost room, filled with old, dusty volumes. The other 4 rooms are bedrooms, 2 of which have no beds, but one has a television, while the other, the one on the right, has no furniture at all. In the living room, in the bedroom next to the bookcase, there's a TV that remains constantly on, despite the apparent abandonment of the manor, displaying static images on the screen. This television actually houses a rotom that only appears at night, offering the player the opportunity to challenge and capture it. Based on the description of the location alone, it seems like a simple abandoned place that leaves the player somewhat perplexed, without a convincing explanation. But the real mystery arises from the presence of several ghosts that appear inside the chateau. In fact, the ghosts of a little girl and a butler appear from time to time, in the rightmost bedroom and in the dining room, respectively. Interaction with the characters is impossible, as the two characters will float around and then disappear immediately afterward.
The little girl appears in the far right room when the player enters the room to their left. When this happens, the ghost looks left toward the player and then moves toward the exit, never to be seen again. The butler, however, appears sitting across the dining room table when the player enters. As the player moves forward, he begins to move left until he disappears from the frame, as if heading for the kitchen, where he never appears. The anime features 2 episodes showcasing Old Chateau. The first is Get Your Rotom Running, which reveals that the place is abandoned due to a power outage caused by a rotom that enjoys taking the form of various electrical appliances to prank visitors. Meanwhile, in the Pokémon Generations series, in the 10th episode, titled The Old Chateau, Cheryl, a trainer from the Sinnoh region, arrives at the manor to spend the night with her Chansey. During the night, however, they are attacked by 2 ghosts, the butler and the little girl, who confuse them with illusions and ultimately attack them. The question that now arises is, what mystery lies behind the presence of these 2 ghosts? Before continuing with the video and giving you a plausible answer, we'd like to remind you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support the content we are providing. It only takes a few seconds to do so, and it really helps us a lot. Thank you. Now, let's continue with the video. The manor is in terrible condition and suffers greatly from the abandonment of its owners, who appear to be members of Charon's family, one of the 4 commanders of the Galactic Team. It is said that Charon spent the first years of his life inside the chateau. It is said that a Rotom was his best friend, as well as Charon's first Pokémon, and that they met in the garden of the Old Chateau. Nothing is known about how the Old Chateau became the abandoned and run-down place we see in the games, but we can theorize a few things by putting together the pieces at our disposal. So, to recap, there are 2 ghosts inside the chateau. A little girl, who could be Charon's sister, and the butler, who is probably a simple employee of the family who lived inside the chateau. One thing is certain, the chateau was definitely reduced to that state by a fire, a theory supported by the presence of burn marks scattered throughout the rooms. It's speculated that the fire was started by Rotom, after Charon ordered it to break into some appliances to see if it could do so. After several attempts with various appliances, Charon suggested trying a microwave, and it was with this appliance that Rotom had a problem, likely causing a short circuit and setting the chateau ablaze. As the fire spread, every room filled with smoke, including the one where Charon's sister was present. Unfortunately, the little girl was unable to save herself due to the toxic clouds that were now spreading throughout the house. A last-ditch effort was made by the butler, who ran into the kitchen to retrieve something to try and save her. But things, as you can imagine, went awry. By then, the toxic clouds had completely engulfed the house, and the butler also died from inhaling the smoke.
If we observe the movements of the 2 ghosts in the game, the little girl's movement appears to be a desperate attempt to escape the smoke-filled room. The butler's movement, however, is an infinite loop of trying to run to the kitchen to find something to help the little girl, hopeful that he can still save her. After the mistake that cost the death of his sister and the butler, Karen decides to leave Rotom inside the house forever, blaming it for the loss of those dear to him. However, he hasn't stopped trying to understand what went wrong during their ordeal, almost unable to accept everything that has happened. This is demonstrated by the presence of his Rotom's room in Team Galactic's headquarters in Eterna City in Pokémon Platinum, the Hearthome City Church.
The next mystery is one of those mysteries that perhaps didn't bother us as children, and perhaps many of you don't even remember this building. In the Sinnoh region, specifically in Hearthome City, in the eastern part of the city, there's a building much larger than the others. Upon entering, we discover it's a sort of church, an unusual feature in a Pokémon game where religious themes are usually avoided, being a title designed primarily for children. Furthermore, strangely, there's no background music inside, creating a sense of unease and tension. All of this, combined with the fact that Generation 4 introduced the figure of a Pokémon god, led many to believe this place might be linked to an important event. But as we know, that wasn't the case. There's no concrete evidence that this cathedral holds a mystery, but it's curious that they chose a church to fill that gap from all the options available. Furthermore, typically, in games in the franchise, placing a building this large and different from the others serves to hint to the player that there's some important quest to complete. Trying to talk to the characters and examining the decorations inside, we can't find any clear clues. The conversations are general and about the Pokémon world and life, but there's no mention of Arceus. On the central wall, we find an image that appears to depict the Spear Pillar, but no clues are revealed. However, in the remakes, Shining Diamond and Shining Pearl, the church's exterior has been modified. On the facade, a figure appears that appears to represent Arceus, but in a form never seen before. This fueled theories about a new form of Arceus that was thought to be seen in Pokémon Legends Arceus. In fact, it was later confirmed that the one we know isn't its true form, but merely a manifestation. Unfortunately, even in Pokémon Legends Arceus, we haven't received any concrete answers, so this remains another unsolved mystery.
Pokémon Beta. Unlike what we've become accustomed to seeing from previous generations, in the Pokémon Diamond and Pokémon Pearl games, all the Pokémon featured in the beta versions of the game were later included in the official games, all except one. Kyurem, whose name derives from Chimera, is a beta Pokémon that was never released in the official version of the 4th generation games. It was initially placed in the slot reserved for Giratina, but unlike the placeholder Pokémon we'll discuss shortly, this one doesn't appear to be a placeholder for Giratina, but rather a Pokémon in its own right. The Pokémon appears to be a reference to a Chinese entity also known as a member of the Four Dangers, named Hoenn, a six-legged mythological entity that represents chaos, or, in some variants of the myth, the cosmic egg from which everything is born. From this last variant of the myth, it can be hypothesized that Kyurem was not a creature inferior to Arceus, but equal to it, or even a creature born from the chaos that in turn created Arceus. Unfortunately, this mystery remains, and strangely, Kyurem was replaced shortly before its official release. Giratina was chosen in its place, a Pokémon that certainly has a different lore than what one might imagine for Kyurem. As mentioned before, the Pokémon present in the Diamond and Pearl beta are all the Pokémon we later saw in the final versions of the games. However, viewing the beta, we find many Pokémon not in their final versions. We find a Darkrai that was certainly designed and complete in terms of artwork and lore, but with a placeholder that seems to have been rushed, just to try it out in the game. The same is true for Pokémon like Probopass, Shaymin, Regigigas, and many others. We then have a category of Pokémon with more elaborate in-game sprites that are very close to their final versions, but were revised and modified at the last minute before release. A redesign of the evolutionary line featuring Gible, Gabite, and Garchomp is immediately noticeable. The designs of Gible and Gabite, which initially stood on all fours, and only in Garchomp's final evolutionary stage did they become a bipedal Pokémon. The orange body color was later changed to the version we know them as today, and details were added to the body that were not initially present in the early versions. Many fans love this beta evolutionary line. Which do you prefer, the beta version or the final version? Okay, now that we're done with Generation 4, let's move on to Generation 5. Genesect. Genesect is a bug and steel-type mythical Pokémon from Generation 5. Its Pokédex entry in the Black and White games describes it as an ancient bug-type Pokémon modified by Team Plasma, who significantly enhanced its bat cannon. However, the Pokédex entry for the Black and White games, White 2 and Black 2, states that Team Plasma actually equipped Genesect with a cannon. I'm pretty sure the second one is correct, but that's just my opinion. What about you? What do you think? Did the Plasma team assemble the cannon, or was it assembled by someone else, perhaps in the distant past? Let me know in the comments. Returning to Genesect, the question that now arises is what is this Pokémon's true origins? Checking the Pokémon Wiki, we immediately notice various references taken from the manga and anime. In the 119th episode of the Pokémon Black and White series, titled Meowth, Colress, and Team Rivalry, we see the first appearance not of a single Genesect, but of a group of 5 Genesect. Before the events of the animated series and the 16th movie, the Genesect army was created by Team Plasma in their laboratory. After their creation, however, the Genesect decide to attack them, driving Team Plasma away and destroying the entire laboratory. The army of 5 Genesect is led by a shiny Genesect, known as the Red Genesect.
There are other small appearances in the animated series, but they don't shed any new light on their origins. In the 16th movie, which I mentioned earlier, the Genesect group is seen flying through a blizzard to reach their homeland. While trying to reach the top of a mountain, the red Genesect is buried in an avalanche, while the other four are saved by Mew. Mew explains that too much time has passed since they were last alive. This short piece of Pokémon dialogue gives us a hint that perhaps these Genesect aren't simply modified, but are some sort of reanimated undead. Something like Naruto's Edo Tensei. Okay, maybe my imagination's running wild and I'm getting carried away with speculation. But it's still a fascinating theory, don't you think? The movie, apart from what Mew said, doesn't give us any other significant clues, and doesn't tell us how Team Plasma managed to revive the Genesect and modify them. If it was them, of course. However, checking the manga reveals a little more about these Pokemon's past. It says that Genesect was a bug Pokemon that existed 300 million years ago, and that before the Black 2 and White 2 arc, it was revived and modified by Team Plasma, who added steel armor and a cannon to its body to make it a war machine. Now, we're certain that these Genesect are practically undead, and that my speculation was correct. But now, another question arises. Now that we know they were reanimated and fitted with an artificial exoskeleton, what could Genesect's original appearance actually be? Most of the community thinks this Pokémon is just a fictional generalization of prehistoric arthropods, but there is a good portion of fans who believe it is actually based on a creature that once existed. They mainly refer to Kabutops, even going so far as to say that they could, in fact, be the same creature. Sure, they have physical similarities, such as the flat head, number of limbs, and posture, but unfortunately, there are also many inconsistencies. The biggest is that, as we know, Kabutops has a well-developed internal skeleton, and since Genesect is an insect-type Pokémon, that means it should be an invertebrate, like all other insect-type Pokémon. Perhaps there is a possibility that Kabutops is a relative of Genesect. I want to weigh in on this speculation. Given the similarity in appearance between Genesect and Kabutops, and given that we're no longer in Kanto, but practically on another continent, I'd also consider the hypothesis that Genesect is, it was, a different regional form of Kabutops. What do you think? Does this theory hold up? A final theory that intrigued us was that of a Reddit user. This user explains how Lurantis, a grass-type Pokémon from Generation 7, despite its bug-type appearance, could actually be related to Genesect. In fact, Lurantis is actually a plant that pretends to be an insect, a defense mechanism used to scare off predators. The question this Reddit user asked was, what is Lurantis imitating? There are no insect Pokémon that resemble Lurantis, and if we place its sprite alongside Genesect, we can see a distant resemblance. In conclusion, this Reddit user's speculation is based on the possibility that Lurantis took on the appearance of Genesect a long time ago. Obviously, this is nothing official, but simply speculation from a fan with a rather interesting imagination. I find it quite interesting and plausible. And you?
Kyurem, which, in my opinion, has been somewhat poorly placed as a legendary Pokémon in the game. It is a Dragon Ice-type legendary Pokémon that dwells in the depth of the Giant Chasm. By the myth, its origins are very similar to those of Deoxys. In fact, Kyurem is also an extraterrestrial life form. But while Deoxys was a virus just before entering the planet's atmosphere, Kyurem was already fully formed before even arriving on the planet. According to the legend, Kyurem arrived on our planet inside a huge icy rock, perhaps a fragment of a meteorite or a cocoon it created itself. The place where this enormous rock crashed is precisely the Giant Chasm. Kyurem is considered one of the most powerful dragon-type Pokémon, and the legends of Lacunosa Town dictate that Kyurem would come out at night and eat both Pokémon and people. To prevent further raids, the people of the town built walls and forbade night travel. Even during the events of Black White, Black 2, and White 2, everyone in Lacunosa Town stays indoors at night. I am sure that it is the most powerful Pokémon, at least of the dragon type, in the Unova region. But what is its connection with Reshiram and Zekrom? I know that they are considered as the Tao Trio, and that doesn't make any sense to me.
The Tao is about yin and yang, good and evil, two sides of one thing. So why it is a trio? Kyurem doesn't suit between them. If we consider the 15th Pokémon movie, Kyurem versus the Sword of Justice, we can say that Reshiram and Zekrom are just part of Kyurem's power, since it can transform into its white and black forms. Okay, I'm not the one that consider canon what happened in the movies of the franchise.
But since the Pokemon Black and White games don't give us enough information about the background of this Pokemon,
I guess we can take those information as a hint. I'm pretty sure that my consideration is not that wrong, even though it still is a nonsense for the Tao dualism. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you for doing so.
strange house.
Unova, like all the previous regions we've seen in the entire Pokemon Mysteries series, features peculiar places that initially make you doubt what you've actually seen. One of these places is the strange house located outside the Reversal Mountain. The house appears to be a small, old, abandoned 3-story residence. The ground floor includes a large entrance area with 2 rooms and stairs leading to the other parts of the house. On the lower floor is a library. While going up the stairs, we'll find 3 more rooms on the first floor. Here too, like the Old Chateau from the last episode, there are ghosts. In this case, more specifically, the ghost of a girl who, as we explore the house, will deliberately move various pieces of furniture to force us to enter specific rooms. The entire house contains nothing of significance except the lunar wing or lunar feather, which we'll find in one of the many rooms. This artifact is rare and is considered legendary and associated with Cresselia. If we look closely, the ghost of the girl inside the house is the same one that appears on the Marvelous Bridge when we walk across it. We'll see the sprite of a girl suddenly disappear as soon as we get too close. Speaking to an old woman nearby, she'll tell us that the girl used to play with her Abra before the bridge was built. That's all we know about her, with no further convincing explanations. This is where the fan theories begin. Some thought she was a trainer in the game who, using her Abra, enjoyed scaring the player by teleporting. Subsequently, countless other theories have gained credence in the community. Some believe this girl died during the construction of the bridge while playing with her Abra and returned as a ghost to find her old Pokémon. Other users, however, believe it's actually the Psychic-type Pokémon wandering the bridge in the hope of meeting its trainer again, who passed away there. In this scenario, one might think that Abra herself is creating the illusion of being that very girl, and as soon as the player approaches, she teleports away. A final theory regarding this character is that the young girl was killed in her sleep by Darkrai, and that the lunar feather, located inside the strange house, was brought by someone who attempted to use it to awaken the poor girl. Unfortunately, however, whoever brought it appears to have arrived too late, leaving the object in the room and leaving everything as it was.
Beta Pokemon. The 5th generation, unlike all the previous generations, doesn't bring many Pokemon or concepts discarded during the game's development. Unova does feature completely new Pokemon, but they're all new designs or reinterpretations of older Pokemon, like Audino, extremely similar to previously created Pokemon. I don't have to tell you which Pokemon I'm referring to, I assume. Let's get back to the concept. Dino's evolutionary line was initially inspired by tanks. In a 2010 interview, it was explained that an element of the initial concept remained in the final 2 evolutions of the evolutionary line. Indeed, you can see striped patterns that were actually inspired by tank treads. Another Pokemon that initially had a different concept is Stunfisk. Initially, the Pokemon was a water-electric type with a blue coloration. It was later changed to an electric ground type with the brown coloration that would later appear in the final games. Litwick's evolutionary line was initially conceived as a simple flame that would later evolve into a candle. However, it was decided to start directly with the candle shape to make the design more recognizable and consistent. Created by James Tarner, these Ice-type Pokemon are inspired by ice cream and follow a similar evolutionary pattern to Tao and Magneton. Looking for new ideas for fighting-type Pokemon, Sugimori considered creating a Pokemon based on Judo. During the development of Diamond and Pearl, the design of what later became Throw was scrapped. It was later repurposed for Pokemon Black and White, and a rival counterpart based on the Karate Chop was also created. Furthermore, these Pokemon initially had horns, but not eyebrows. Personally, I would have preferred them this way, with horns rather than without. What about you?
So, with this last bit of trivia, I conclude our journey through the beautiful region of Unova. Unfortunately, Unova brings with it so many mysteries, making it a region impossible to fully explore in a single video. If you're interested in discovering and delving deeper into other 5th generation secrets, let me know in the comments below. Remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future content, and we'll refer you to previous videos on the mysteries of other generations if you haven't seen them yet. We'll see you in a future video. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.